Well, the 32 leaders of NATO's member countries, including Prime Minister Trudeau, are gathering in Washington, D.C. for what is certainly expected to be a high-stakes summit to mark the alliance's 75th anniversary. Now, the war in Ukraine will certainly dominate discussions, but so too will the issue of defense spending. Effectively, who is paying their freight and who's not? And guess what? Canada is being singled out for not living up to its promise. Here to provide insight on what may come out of the NATO Summit, Ferry de Kerckhove. He's a former Canadian ambassador and a senior fellow at the University of Ottawa. Mr. de Kerckhove, we appreciate this. Welcome to the program.
Thank you for having me.
So let's get into, first of all, the defense spending. The issue and the promise is 2% of GDP allotted to defense. Canada right now, 1.37, has a plan for higher than that, 1.67, still short of the 2%. I'm curious how Canada is being perceived by its allies.
Oh, from its allies, of course, as a laggard, there hasn't been an American president who hasn't browbeaten Canada for not meeting our 2% commitment. So it's clear that when you have a bunch of senators and representatives sending a collective letter to the Prime Minister, the pressure is on. You will recall Obama put the pressure, Biden puts the pressure. But the problem, from my perspective, is that there's so much emphasis on the 2%. Canada needs much more than going to 2%. It has to revisit how it does its own defense spending. It has to have a policy that jives with a foreign policy. It's the only country that produced a defense policy review and then a few years later a foreign policy review, as if those were two different items, even they're fully coordinated. Now, on the positive side, of course, we've offered to have a brigade in Latvia. But on the other hand, we don't join the Americans and the Indian and others on providing some support in Asia Pacific. We don't like submarine, apparently, because the Prime Minister doesn't like nuclear submarine. We're laggards in thinking, we're laggard in spending. And we have a major issue in the north. You know, renewing NORAD is one thing, but we're still neighbor to the USSR, pardon me, Russia, and we've got to do something in defense of the north. Now, as you know, northern defense is more expeditionary than it is conventional. So we're very, very, very behind the cue ball. And I think that this is one fundamental issue that will be raised. But of course, we will look nice and clean and sing. But I think that that will bear heavily eventually also on the future election of Canada.
You have been a part of many of these discussions on many other issues, perhaps even including this with your colleagues and your counterparts from other countries. Describe some of those conversations.
Okay, because the alliance right now is meeting, and I should say that it's not a celebration, it's much more, given the state of the world, a reaffirmation of collective security on the pertinence of the alliance, the transfer to an USG. So, you know, it's a heavy agenda, but I'm sure that every corner somebody will look in under the nose of Trudeau and say, when are you going to cough up? And we're also looking at the potential return of Trump, and Trump will be lethal with us. And so the discussions are extremely polite. I served at NATO for 4 years, and it's always a very well choreographed ballet. And a lot of people will be probably looking more at Biden. They will be looking at Prime Minister Trudeau. But the atmosphere is becoming a bit heavy and heated on us. And I don't know, you know, the 2029 commitment to arrive at what, 1.67 or whatever, this is a bit of hogwash for one of the wealthiest countries in the world, because, you know, we're ranked among the top 3 on the purchasing parity of the world. So we're a very wealthy country, and we should make a sacrifice.
Obviously, a very important summit, sort of the 75th anniversary for the NATO alliance, and a lot of changes as well, right? You have 32 nations, up to welcoming Sweden and Finland. And while a lot of people think this is stronger, others say it's more vulnerable. And I'm curious what your thoughts are, where NATO goes from here.
Well, it is vulnerable in the sense that we're helping waging a war in Ukraine, and that we're facing Russia-China conundrum. We're facing, the risk of North Korea. The world is a bad place to be right now. And look at all the coup d'etat in Africa. We don't spend much time on the other continents. But no, the world is really in disarray. And that's why I'm saying it's not a celebration. And I think that, of course, the Secretary General put a lot of emphasis on rearming and beefing up the support to Ukraine. And we have, thanks God, we have a reasonable man in the UK and a very good foreign minister who is going to continue to help Ukraine. But, it's exhausting for the alliance, and the panic in front of potential Trump arrival, which would, the wheeled cart will be completely shoved around. So, and don't forget, you also have the instability of elections in Europe other than in the UK. So the atmosphere being what it is an important summit. I think there'll be attempt to rope in even some more cooperation with Asian partners so that we can face better China. We still have to manage a difficult and complex relationship with India. Mr. Modi traveling to Moscow right now in full embrace with Putin, because Putin is the guy who supplies most of the weaponry to India. So there's a host of issues. It's a very serious anniversary in terms of what this alliance can be done. But let's never forget one fundamental thing. NATO is the only real alliance in the world, and therefore it has a lot of pizzazz despite some of its problems. Of course, we have Orban, who is kissing the ass of Putin, of Xi Jinping, and all that. But that's a sideshow. As long as we can agree that Ukraine doesn't participate in any of the operation in Ukraine, we can still have an EU that is united on that front too. But there's a lot of other issues going. So it's basically an important moment to solidify and even rebuild the alliance now that we've expanded to a point that was a miracle. 4 or 5 years ago, we would never think that Sweden, Finland would get into it. So it's quite remarkable. So, the other issue I think that I would point out to is what is the industrial capacity that the West can build other than through the US, given the stakes in Europe. And that's where I always tend to vouch for a better united European defense community, not at loggerheads with the US, but cooperating with a certain concern for how much behind they are in terms of arms procurement. And by the way, arms procurement is also a hell of an issue for Canada. We do it badly, and we haven't done it better in the last 10, 15 years.
Well, these are big problems that require big solutions, obviously, and we appreciate your insights, sir. Thank you so much. That is Ferry de Kerckhove. He's a former Canadian ambassador and now a senior fellow at the University of Ottawa. Thank you again.